What happens when you discover your husband's affair through a viral TikTok video that already has 90,000 views, when everyone in the comments thinks he's single and available, living his best life with a woman who clearly isn't you? Sarah Mitchell thought she was losing her mind. Her husband David convinced her she was paranoid, unstable, seeing conspiracies where none existed. He systematically destroyed her confidence, isolated her from friends, and controlled every dollar she spent. But what Sarah didn't know was that David wasn't just cheating on her. He was running a $50 million criminal enterprise designed to help wealthy men psychologically destroy their wives while stealing everything they own. And she had accidentally discovered the biggest financial fraud case in federal history. This is the true story of how one woman's desperate search for the truth exposed a nationwide conspiracy, brought down corrupt judges and prosecutors, and saved hundreds of families from systematic destruction. But before Sarah could save anyone else, she had to survive her husband's carefully planned campaign to convince the world she was mentally unstable and unfit to raise their children. A campaign that had been years in the making and was about to reach its devastating conclusion. If you're ready to discover how far some people will go to maintain their perfect image while destroying the people closest to them, then stay with us for the next hour. Because this story will change how you think about manipulation, gaslighting, and the hidden crimes that happen inside seemingly perfect marriages. Sarah Mitchell stared at her phone screen in their pristine suburban Dallas kitchen, her morning coffee growing cold as the TikTok video played for the fourth time. There was her husband David, arm wrapped intimately around his assistant Maya Chen, both laughing at what appeared to be an exclusive dinner during the Austin Tech conference. The caption read, "Power Couple Goals at SX Tech 2025, with fire emojis dancing across the screen." Her hands trembled as she watched David lean in to whisper something in Maya's ear, the exact same gesture he used to do with her during their early dating years at SMU. The intimate way Maya's hand rested on his chest, how she tilted her head to catch his words, the comfortable familiarity between them that spoke of months, maybe years of secret moments. The video had already gathered 90,000 views and hundreds of comments praising the beautiful couple and asking when they were getting married. Sarah's stomach churned as she read comment after comment, assuming David was single, available, living his best life with this stunning younger woman who clearly understood his world in ways his frumpy housewife never could. "Mommy, why are you crying?" 8-year-old Connor appeared in the kitchen doorway, still wearing his Spider-Man pajamas, his dark hair sticking up in every direction. Behind him, 6-year-old Emma clutched her stuffed elephant, both children looking at their mother with the concerned expressions that had become too familiar lately. Sarah quickly wiped her cheeks and forced the bright smile she had perfected over years of hiding her pain from her children. "Just something in my eyes, sweetheart. You know how mommy gets with her allergies? Go get dressed for school. Both of you. I'll make your favorite pancakes." The front door slammed with the particular force that announced David's return from his 3-day business trip to Austin. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as his expensive Italian leather shoes clicked across the hardwood floors she had spent years keeping spotless. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, looking exactly as he had in the viral video, wearing the same navy Armani suit she had helped him select and pack, the one that made his blue eyes look deeper and his shoulders broader. "Morning, beautiful," David said, kissing her cheek with the practiced casualness of a man who had perfected the art of deception. His cologne, Tom Ford Oud Wood, filled her nostrils with its familiar masculine scent that used to make her feel safe and desired. Now it just smelled like lies. "Missed me while I was saving the company from financial ruin." Sarah held up her phone. The video paused on his smiling face next to Maya's radiant beauty. The contrast was devastating, his expression more genuinely happy than she had seen in months of their marriage. "Care to explain this, David?" David's expression didn't change, but she caught the microsecond of panic that flashed across his features before his lawyer training kicked in. He had always been good at controlling his reactions, a skill that had made him successful in business and devastating in marriage. "That," he glanced at the screen with manufactured indifference, "it's networking. Sarah, Maya's my assistant. We were at a company dinner with the Stevenson Group, potential investors who could make or break our Series B funding. You know how critical this round is for the company's survival. It doesn't look like a company dinner, David. It looks like a date." Because you don't understand my industry. His voice carried that familiar condescending tone that always made her feel like a naive child who had wandered into adult conversations. This is how business works in tech, especially at the executive level. Relationships matter. Personal connections drive investment decisions. Maybe if you hadn't abandoned your promising marketing career to play housewife, you'd understand the nuances of high-stakes business development. The words hit like a physical blow to her solar plexus. Sarah had left her rapidly advancing career at Preston and Associates, one of Dallas's most prestigious advertising agencies, when Emma was born. But it hadn't been abandonment. It had been David's idea. His passionate arguments about their children needing their mother's full attention during their formative years. I didn't abandon anything. We agreed that one of us should be home with Connor and Emma. That family came first. David laughed, the sound sharp and cruel in their bright kitchen, with its cheerful yellow walls and children's artwork covering the refrigerator. You begged me to let you quit because you couldn't handle the pressure of juggling motherhood and a demanding career. You said you felt overwhelmed. Remember, don't rewrite history to make yourself feel better about your choices. Sarah. Sarah felt the familiar fog of confusion descending, that disorienting sensation of having her own memories questioned and reshaped. Had she begged, she remembered being exhausted, overwhelmed by trying to balance client presentations with sleepless nights and a toddler's needs. But David had been supportive then, hadn't he? He had held her while she cried about missing Connor's first steps because of a client meeting, had suggested she consider staying home, had made it seem like a luxury they could afford because of his success. The video has 90,000 views. David, people think you're dating her. So what? People share content from industry conferences all the time. Social media engagement drives brand awareness. You're being paranoid. Sarah, seeing romantic conspiracy in routine business interactions. David poured himself coffee from the expensive machine he had insisted they needed, his movements deliberate and calm. Maya's engaged to some software engineer in Seattle anyway. You're embarrassing yourself with these jealous fantasies. But as David turned away to add cream to his coffee, Sarah caught his reflection in the chrome surface of the refrigerator. He was smiling, a small, satisfied expression that looked nothing like the concerned husband he was pretending to be. It was the smile of a man who was enjoying her pain, who found amusement in her confusion and desperation. I'm not being paranoid, Sarah said quietly, but her voice lacked conviction, even to her own ears. Of course you're not, David replied, his tone now gentle and patient, as if speaking to someone fragile. But you have to admit, Sarah, you've been under a lot of stress lately. The kids, the house, managing everything while I work to provide for our family. Maybe we should look into getting you some help, someone to talk to about these anxious thoughts. The suggestion hung in the air like a threat disguised as concern. Sarah stared at her husband of 9 years, this man she had loved since college, and felt something fundamental shift inside her chest. For the first time, she saw him clearly, not as the devoted partner and father she had believed him to be, but as a stranger who had been systematically convincing her that her reality was unreliable. Upstairs, Connor and Emma were getting ready for school, their innocent laughter drifting down through the house like a reminder of everything she stood to lose if she pushed too hard, questioned too much, refused to accept the version of truth David was selling. But the image of him with Maya burned behind her eyelids. And for once, Sarah trusted what she had seen with her own eyes more than the carefully constructed explanations of the man who was supposed to love her. Over the following 3 weeks, David's campaign to undermine Sarah's reality intensified with the methodical precision of a military operation. He started with small things, subtle manipulations designed to make her question her own memory and perception. Sarah would place her car keys on the kitchen counter before bed, only to find them in her purse the next morning. When she mentioned it, David would look at her with gentle concern and suggest that pregnancy brain sometimes lingered longer than people expected, even though Emma was 6 years old. You've always been a little scattered, sweetheart, he would say, his voice warm with affection that felt increasingly false. Remember how you used to lose your earrings in college? I used to tease you about having holes in your pockets. But Sarah didn't remember being scattered. In her career at Preston and Associates, she had been known for her meticulous attention to detail, her ability to juggle multiple high-pressure campaigns without dropping a single deadline or detail. Clients had specifically requested her because of her reliability and organizational skills. The gaslighting escalated when Sarah mentioned feeling increasingly isolated from their friends. She had tried calling Michelle Garrett, her former neighbor and fellow soccer mom, only to have the conversation feel strangely strained and distant. Michelle seemed weird when I talked to her yesterday, Sarah told David over dinner while the children played in the living room. She kept asking how I was doing in this concerned way, like she knew something I didn't. David looked up from his grilled salmon with an expression of careful neutrality. Weird how, like she was walking on eggshells. And when I mentioned wanting to get coffee with her next week, she said she was really busy with her mother-in-law visiting. But then Emma saw on Instagram that Michelle went to lunch with Jennifer and Lisa from the PTA. Sarah, David said gently, setting down his fork. Michelle didn't call you yesterday. Yes, she did. We talked for 20 minutes about Connor's soccer schedule and the spring fundraiser. Honey, check your call log. Sarah pulled out her phone with hands that had started to tremble. The call history showed no incoming calls from Michelle, no 20-minute conversation, nothing that corresponded to the detailed discussion she clearly remembered having. I don't understand, she whispered, staring at the screen. I remember talking to her. We discussed the fundraiser theme, whether to do a carnival or a silent auction. She said the PTA was leaning toward the auction because it was less work. David reached across the table and took her hand, his touch gentle but somehow clinical. This has been happening more often. Sarah, the forgetfulness, the confusion about conversations and events. I'm worried about you. I'm not confused. I remember that conversation. The same way you remembered putting your keys on the counter, or how you were certain you had scheduled Emma's dentist appointment for last Tuesday when it was actually this Thursday. David's voice held no accusation, only patient concern that somehow felt more devastating than anger would have been. The financial control began subtly, almost imperceptibly. Sarah first noticed when her debit card was declined at Target while buying groceries and supplies for Emma's class, Valentine's party. Standing in the checkout line with a cart full of pink construction paper, heart-shaped cookies, and juice boxes while other mothers waited behind her felt like a public branding of her incompetence. I'm sorry, ma'am, but your card has been declined, the teenage cashier said, her voice carrying the practiced sympathy of someone who delivered this news multiple times per day. Do you have another form of payment? Sarah's face burned with embarrassment as she fumbled through her wallet. There must be a mistake. Can you try running it again? The second attempt failed as well, and Sarah was forced to abandon her cart and call David from the parking lot, while Connor and Emma asked why they couldn't buy the Valentine's supplies like all the other kids. Oh, I moved our checking account balance to the business savings for tax purposes, David explained when she reached him, his voice distracted by whatever meeting he was attending. The accountant said it would be more advantageous for the quarterly filing. I thought I mentioned it to you. You didn't mention it. David, when will you transfer it back? Emma's party is tomorrow. Tomorrow's tricky. I'm in back-to-back meetings with the Stevenson group all day, maybe Friday or early next week. You understand how critical this funding round is for our family's financial future? What am I supposed to do about groceries about Emma's party? Can't you borrow from your mother or ask one of the other PTA moms to help with the party supplies? I'm sure they'd understand that successful families sometimes have complex financial arrangements. That evening, Sarah stood in their walk-in closet, staring at her reflection in the full-length mirror David had installed when they remodeled the master bedroom. When had she started looking so tired, so defeated? Her post-pregnancy body, which had never fully returned to its pre-children state, felt foreign and disappointing. The soft roundness at her hips and stomach that had once seemed like evidence of the beautiful life she had created now felt like proof of her failure to maintain herself properly. David's words echoed in her mind. Maya takes care of herself. She understands that personal presentation matters in business, that successful people invest in their appearance because it's an investment in their professional success. The social isolation followed a predictable pattern that Sarah didn't recognize until she was already trapped within it. At Connor's soccer game the following Saturday, she noticed other parents avoiding extended eye contact. Conversations that should have flowed naturally felt stilted and careful, as if everyone was following a script she hadn't been given. When she approached Michelle Garrett at the snack bar, hoping to resolve the confusion about their phone conversation, Michelle's reaction confirmed Sarah's growing suspicion that something fundamental had changed in her social world. Sarah, hi, Michelle said, her voice carrying a tone of careful warmth that felt rehearsed. How are you doing, really? I. How are you holding up? I'm fine. Why wouldn't I be fine? Is there something I should know about? Michelle exchanged a meaningful glance with Jennifer Walsh, another soccer mom who had suddenly found urgent business organizing napkins at the snack bar. The silent communication between them was loaded with significance Sarah couldn't decode. David mentioned that you've been struggling lately, Michelle said carefully. With the stress of managing everything at home while he builds the business, we're all worried about you. Sarah, you seem so isolated, so overwhelmed. Struggling with what? Exactly. You know, the mood swings, the paranoia about David's work relationships, the confusion about conversations and appointments. He's just concerned about the children, making sure they have stability during this difficult time. The words hit Sarah like a physical assault. What mood swings? What paranoia? Of course, Michelle said with eyes full of pity that made Sarah want to disappear into the ground. We all understand how hard it is being a stay-at-home mom, especially when your husband has such a demanding career. The isolation can really affect your mental health. Maybe you should consider talking to someone professional. I have the name of a wonderful therapist who specializes in women's issues. Sarah felt the earth shifting beneath her feet, her reality rearranging itself in ways she couldn't control or understand. I don't need a therapist. I need to know what David told you about me. But Michelle had already turned back to the snack bar, effectively ending the conversation and leaving Sarah standing alone beside the soccer field while her son played and her husband's lies spread through their community like poison in the water supply. That night, David announced his plans for the annual Techstar Awards Gala, the industry's most prestigious event where his startup would be competing for Innovator of the Year. The award could secure the Series B funding they desperately needed and establish David as a major player in the Dallas tech scene. I'd like to come with you, Sarah said, surprising herself with the boldness of the request. She hadn't attended an industry event since Emma was born, hadn't worn anything fancier than yoga pants and sweaters to the grocery store in months. David looked up from his laptop with an expression of genuine surprise. The Techstar Gala, Sarah. It's not really your scene anymore. What do you mean? Not my scene. I used to attend industry events all the time when I was at Preston and Associates. I understand business networking, client relations, professional presentations. That was different. You were working then. You were current on industry trends and innovations. Now you're... He gestured vaguely at her appearance, taking in her faded jeans and oversized cardigan with something that looked suspiciously like distaste. I'm what? David. Look, sweetheart, these people are VPs, CEOs, major investors, industry thought leaders. The conversations are highly technical, focused on emerging technologies, market disruptions, venture capital strategies. Maya has been working on the presentation for months. She understands our product development roadmap, our competitive positioning, our financial projections. She can speak intelligently about cryptocurrency integration and blockchain applications. The mention of Maya's name in this context felt like a slap. So can I. I helped you develop the original business concept. Remember, I was the one who identified the market gap in financial technology solutions? David's expression softened into something that looked like patience stretched thin. That was 3 years ago. Sarah. The product has evolved far beyond those initial concepts. Maya has an MBA from Wharton. She speaks fluent Mandarin for our Asian market expansion. She has relationships with venture capital firms that could make or break our funding round. She's already RSVP'd as my +1 for the networking reception and the awards dinner. The words landed like physical blows, each one precisely aimed to destroy what remained of Sarah's confidence. Your assistant is your +1 to the most important industry event of the year. She's not just my assistant anymore. Sarah. She's been promoted to Director of Strategic Partnerships. This gala is essentially a working event for us, a chance to solidify relationships with investors who could provide the capital we need to scale the company nationally. And I can't be part of that because I've been home raising our children. You can't be part of it because you've lost touch with the industry, with the language, with the culture. These people will be discussing complex financial instruments, international market strategies, regulatory compliance issues. What would you contribute to those conversations? Sarah retreated to the bathroom and closed the door, staring at herself in the mirror above the sink. The woman looking back at her bore little resemblance to the confident marketing executive who had once commanded boardrooms and secured million-dollar contracts. When had she become so invisible in her own life? So dismissed by the man who was supposed to be her partner? But beneath the hurt and confusion, something else was stirring. A small flame of anger that David's systematic destruction hadn't quite managed to extinguish. Sarah's transformation began at 4:37 in the morning, 3 days before the Techstar Awards gala, when she found herself wide awake in their king-size bed while David slept peacefully beside her. She had spent the night replaying every conversation, every subtle insult, every moment when her reality had been questioned and reshaped by the man who claimed to love her. The decision crystallized with sudden clarity. She was done being invisible. Moving carefully to avoid waking David, Sarah slipped from the bed and made her way to the kitchen where she pulled out her phone and called the one person who had known her before David convinced her she was worthless. "Jessica, it's Sarah. I know it's early, but I need help." Jessica Torres had been Sarah's closest friend at Preston and Associates, the one who had warned her about giving up her career, who had tried to stay in touch even as David gradually isolated Sarah from her former life. Now a successful divorce attorney with her own practice, Jessica had the kind of steel-trap mind and fearless attitude that Sarah desperately needed. "Sarah, my God, I've been trying to reach you for months. Are you okay? Really okay?" The concern in Jessica's voice cracked something open in Sarah's chest. "No, I'm not okay, but I'm done being not okay, if that makes sense." Jessica arrived at Sarah's house within 2 hours, taking in her appearance with the practiced assessment of someone who had seen the aftermath of emotional abuse in all its forms. Sarah looked fragile, diminished, like a woman who had been systematically convinced she was worthless. "Tell me everything," Jessica said, settling onto the living room couch with a legal pad and the kind of focused attention that reminded Sarah why she had been such a formidable attorney. The story poured out of Sarah like water through a broken dam: the gaslighting, the financial control, the public humiliation disguised as concern for her mental health, the way David had isolated her from friends and convinced their community that she was unstable and paranoid, the viral TikTok video that had started this nightmare, and Maya Chen's obvious role as the other woman in what was clearly a long-term affair. With each revelation, Jessica's expression grew more grim and more focused. She took detailed notes, asked pointed questions, and began building what Sarah recognized as a legal case even before Jessica explained what she was thinking. "Sarah, what you're describing isn't just marital problems. This is systematic emotional abuse designed to isolate you, control you, and ultimately destroy your credibility so that if you ever tried to leave or fight back, no one would believe you. Sometimes I think I really am going crazy. The things I remember, the conversations he says never happened, the way everyone looks at me now like I'm fragile and unreliable. You're not going crazy. You're being gaslit by someone who's very good at psychological manipulation. But here's what we're going to do. First, you're going to start documenting everything. Every conversation, every incident, every financial transaction, every lie he tells. Second, you're going to remind yourself who you were before he started tearing you down." "I don't remember who that was anymore." Jessica leaned forward, her dark eyes blazing with the intensity that had made her legendary in courtrooms. "I remember. You were brilliant. Sarah, you could walk into a room full of hostile clients and have them eating out of your hand within 10 minutes. You created marketing campaigns that launched products into national consciousness. You made people believe in impossible dreams because you believed first and convinced them to follow you there." The reminder of her former capabilities felt like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Sarah had forgotten that version of herself, the woman who had commanded respect and admiration, who had been known for her intelligence and creativity and unwavering determination. "The Techstar Gala is tomorrow night," Sarah said quietly. "Perfect. Then tomorrow night, you're going to remind David and everyone else exactly who you are." The transformation began at the most exclusive salon in Highland Park, the one Sarah had driven past hundreds of times but never dared to enter. Jessica had made the appointment, using her connections to secure same-day service with the city's most sought-after stylists. I want a complete transformation, Sarah told Antonio, the master stylist whose client list included Dallas socialites, news anchors, and entertainment industry executives. I want to look like the woman I used to be, only better. Antonio studied her with the practiced eye of an artist assessing raw material. Honey, the woman you used to be is still there. We just need to let her out of hiding. The process took 6 hours and felt like therapy, meditation, and surgery all combined into one transformative experience. First came the hair. Years of neglect and cheap drugstore color stripped away to reveal the natural honey blonde that had been hidden beneath layers of damage. Antonio cut away the lifeless length, replacing it with a sleek, sophisticated bob that framed Sarah's face and emphasized her bone structure. Look at those cheekbones, Antonio said as he worked. Girl, you've been hiding your light under a bushel for way too long. The colorist added subtle highlights that made Sarah's green eyes sparkle with life she had forgotten she possessed. Each snip of the scissors felt like cutting away another piece of the diminished woman David had convinced her she was. While the color processed, Sarah was handed off to Elena, the salon's esthetician, who worked on her neglected skin with the focus of a master craftsman restoring a valuable painting. When was the last time you did anything nice for yourself? Elena asked as she applied a hydrating mask that made Sarah's skin feel like silk. I honestly can't remember. Well, we're making up for lost time today. The shopping expedition that followed was equally transformative. Jessica had insisted on accompanying her to Nordstrom, where they worked with a personal stylist who understood the assignment, rebuild a woman's confidence through clothing that made her feel powerful. We're looking for pieces that command attention, Jessica explained to the stylist. My friend has been hiding in the background for too long. It's time for her to reclaim center stage. The red wrap dress was perfect, sophisticated enough for a high-end business event, but bold enough to ensure Sarah would be noticed and remembered. It hugged her curves in all the right places, the color bringing out the warmth in her skin tone and complementing her newly restored hair. You look like a CEO, the stylist said as Sarah examined herself in the three-way mirror. Like someone who makes important decisions and doesn't apologize for taking up space? They added a black blazer that squared Sarah's shoulders with authority, designer heels that added 3 inches to her height and years of confidence to her posture, and jewelry that caught the light without screaming for attention. With each purchase, Sarah felt another piece of her authentic self returning. The credit card bills would be David's problem to explain, and for the first time in years, she didn't care about his reaction. The final stop was the makeup counter, where a young artist named Marcus worked with Sarah's features like he was painting a masterpiece. We're going for power and elegance, Marcus explained as he worked. Think boardroom goddess, not ingenue. You want people to remember your face and wonder how they've been missing someone so striking. The transformation was complete by 5 o'clock that evening. Sarah stared at herself in the salon's full-length mirrors and barely recognized the woman looking back. Gone was the tired, defeated housewife who had been disappearing inch by inch over the past few years. In her place stood a woman who looked capable of conquering worlds. Holy hell, Jessica breathed from behind her. David is going to lose his mind when he sees you. That's the idea, but the real work wasn't done yet. That evening, while David attended what he claimed was a strategy meeting with Maya and the marketing team, Sarah sat in her home office and began the process of reclaiming her digital identity. She updated her LinkedIn profile, adding professional photos Jessica had taken with her phone camera, and updating her skills and experience to reflect the consulting work she had done from home over the past few years. Projects David had dismissed as insignificant, but which represented millions of dollars in client value. She researched the guest list for the Techstar Awards, identifying key players in the Dallas tech scene and preparing conversation topics that would demonstrate her intelligence and industry knowledge. Most importantly, she created new social media accounts under her maiden name, documenting her transformation not as revenge against David, but as reclamation of her authentic self. By the time David returned home that night, Sarah was in bed pretending to sleep, but she was wide awake, planning her entrance to tomorrow night's event with the strategic mind that had once made her one of the most sought-after marketing executives in Dallas. David had no idea what was coming. The Techstar Awards Gala was held at the Omni Dallas Hotel. The ballroom transformed into a high-tech wonderland with LED screens displaying the year's most innovative companies and holographic displays showcasing cutting-edge products. The guest list read like a who's who of Texas technology, venture capital, and business leadership. Sarah arrived fashionably late, a strategic decision designed for maximum impact. She had spent 2 hours getting ready, every detail planned with military precision. Her hair fell in perfect waves. Her makeup was flawless but not overdone, and the red wrap dress moved with her like it had been designed specifically for her body. She paused at the ballroom entrance, scanning the crowd until she spotted David at a prominent table near the stage. Maya sat beside him in a silver sequin dress that caught the light, but somehow looked too young, too obvious compared to Sarah's sophisticated elegance. David's arm rested casually on the back of Maya's chair, in a gesture of intimacy that confirmed every suspicion Sarah had harbored. The entrance created exactly the response Sarah had hoped for. Conversations paused mid-sentence as heads turned to track her movement across the ballroom. She walked with the confidence she had learned from years of client presentations, each step deliberate and purposeful. Sarah Mitchell. The voice belonged to Marcus Thompson, David's biggest investor and a man she had met several times at smaller networking events. His expression showed genuine surprise and admiration. "You look absolutely stunning. I had no idea you were attending tonight." "Surprise appearances can be the most effective," Sarah replied with a smile that revealed nothing of the nerves jangling beneath her polished exterior. "Thank you, Marcus. You look quite distinguished yourself." Marcus guided her toward the bar, clearly pleased to have such an elegant companion for what was certain to be a tedious evening of tech industry networking. "David mentioned that you preferred quiet evenings at home with the children these days." "David says many things." Sarah accepted a glass of champagne from the bartender, noting how the crystal caught the light and reflected it like a prism. "How has your investment in Mitchell Technologies been performing? I'm always curious about the metrics that matter most to serious investors." Marcus's eyebrows rose slightly at her sophisticated question. "Very well. Actually, the platform's user adoption rates have exceeded our most optimistic projections, though I have to say, David's assistant Maya has been instrumental in the recent growth trajectory. Brilliant young woman with exceptional analytical capabilities." "Yes, I've heard she's quite accomplished." Sarah's voice remained perfectly neutral. "Tell me, I'm Marcus. In your experience with portfolio companies, is it standard practice for executive assistants to accompany CEOs to major investor events? I'm genuinely curious about industry best practices." The question was asked with such innocent professionalism that Marcus didn't recognize it as the loaded inquiry it actually was. "Well, it depends on their functional role within the organization. Maya seems to operate more as a strategic business partner than a traditional administrative assistant. Her MBA from Wharton certainly qualifies her for high-level business discussions." "How interesting. And does your wife Helen ever accompany you to investor dinners and industry events?" "Of course she does. Helen has been my partner in everything for 32 years. She understands the business better than most of my employees." "As it should be." Sarah raised her champagne flute in a subtle toast. "To true partnerships built on mutual respect and shared success." Across the ballroom, David had finally noticed her presence. Sarah watched his face cycle through a series of expressions: surprise, confusion, calculation, and finally, barely controlled fury. She could practically see the gears turning in his mind as he tried to process how his supposedly unstable, mentally fragile wife had transformed herself into the most striking woman in the room. David excused himself from his table with forced casualness and began making his way through the crowd towards Sarah and Marcus. His approach was unhurried, professional, but Sarah could see the tension in his shoulders, the tight control he was exerting over his facial expressions. "Sarah." His voice carried just the right note of surprised pleasure for Marcus's benefit. "What a lovely surprise. I didn't realize you had decided to attend tonight." "Last-minute decision," Sarah replied smoothly. "Marcus has been telling me fascinating things about venture capital strategies and portfolio management. I had forgotten how stimulating these industry conversations could be." David's jaw clenched almost imperceptibly. "We should probably find you a place to sit. I'm sure you'll want to rest after getting ready for such a big evening." The condescension in his tone was subtle but unmistakable, designed to position Sarah as someone who needed to be managed rather than someone who belonged in this environment. But Sarah had spent years learning to recognize his manipulation tactics, and tonight she was ready for them. "Actually, I'm quite comfortable here with Marcus, Sarah said. We were just discussing the correlation between executive team stability and long-term investment performance. Weren't we? Marcus. Marcus nodded enthusiastically, clearly enjoying the intellectual conversation. Sarah was asking very sophisticated questions about due diligence processes and portfolio risk assessment. You're lucky to have such an insightful wife. David, most spouses don't understand the complexities of venture capital financing. The compliment hit David like a physical blow. His carefully constructed narrative about Sarah's irrelevance to his business world was crumbling in real time. In front of his most important investor? Yes. Well, Sarah used to work in marketing before she chose to focus on our family, David said, his voice tight with the effort of maintaining his composure. Though the industry has evolved significantly since then. Has it? Sarah tilted her head with apparent curiosity. I've been following the developments in fintech and blockchain integration quite closely. The applications for marketing automation and customer data analysis are fascinating. In fact, I've been consulting with several companies on digital transformation strategies. This was a carefully constructed truth. Sarah had indeed been doing freelance consulting work from home, projects David had dismissed as insignificant, but which had kept her current with industry trends and technologies. Consulting work. David's voice carried a note of skeptical surprise. I wasn't aware you had taken on any professional projects. There's quite a lot you're not aware of. David? Sarah's smile remained pleasant, but her eyes held steel. Perhaps we should catch up properly soon. I'd love to share some insights about market positioning and competitive analysis that might be valuable for your Series B presentations. Before David could respond, the lights dimmed and the evening's program began. Sarah excused herself from Marcus with gracious professionalism and made her way to an empty seat at a table filled with other executives' spouses, leaving David to return to Maya with his carefully maintained image significantly damaged. As the ceremony proceeded, Sarah found herself seated next to Rebecca Walsh, wife of a prominent venture capitalist and a woman known for her sharp intelligence and social acumen. Rebecca had been watching the interaction between Sarah and David with obvious interest. I don't think we've met properly, Rebecca said, extending a manicured hand. Rebecca Walsh, and you're Sarah Mitchell, David's wife, though based on what I just witnessed, I suspect there's considerably more to you than most people realize. There usually is, Sarah replied. Most people only see what they expect to see. How refreshingly honest. Tell me, what's your professional background? David always speaks of you in such vague terms, as if you're some mysterious figure who exists solely in domestic spaces. Sarah felt a spark of genuine pleasure at the opportunity to reclaim her professional identity. I spent 8 years in strategic marketing, primarily in B2B technology sectors. I specialized in market entry strategies for emerging companies and brand positioning for competitive disruption. Before I had children, I managed campaigns that launched 3 different companies into national markets. Rebecca's eyes lit with recognition. Wait, were you Sarah Connor who worked on the Cloud Sync national launch campaign? The one that took them from startup to acquisition in 18 months? Sarah Connor was my maiden name. Yes, that was one of my favorite projects. My husband's firm provided the Series A funding for Cloud Sync specifically because of that campaign. He still talks about it as one of the most sophisticated market positioning strategies he's ever seen from an emerging company. The validation felt like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. For years, David had convinced Sarah that her professional accomplishments were minor, forgettable, irrelevant to the serious business world he inhabited. But here was concrete proof that her work had been not only significant, but memorable to the very investors David spent his time trying to impress. Thank you, Sarah said simply. It's nice to be remembered for the work, rather than just as someone's wife. Oh, my dear, Rebecca said with the wisdom of someone who had navigated corporate and social hierarchies for decades. Never let anyone reduce you to a single role. The smartest women I know maintain multiple identities and never apologize for their complexity. As the awards ceremony continued, Sarah felt herself settling into the version of herself she had lost. The woman who belonged in rooms like this, not as someone's accessory, but as a person of substance and accomplishment. When David's company was announced as a finalist for Innovator of the Year, she applauded politely but without the desperate pride she might have felt months earlier. She was no longer invested in David's success at the expense of her own identity. The real test came when the presenter announced the winner, Mitchell Technologies, for their revolutionary approach to cryptocurrency-based financial services. David was expected to take the stage, accept the award, and give a brief speech about innovation and vision. As the spotlight found their table, Sarah smiled and applauded as if she were genuinely proud, playing the role of supportive wife while internally cataloging every moment for the ammunition it would provide in future battles. David made his way to the stage with the confident stride of a man accustomed to recognition and success. But as he began his acceptance speech, thanking his team, his investors, and his vision for the future, Sarah noticed what he didn't say. He didn't mention his wife, not once. Standing at the podium with the award in his hands, David spoke eloquently about partnership and collaboration, about the importance of having the right people around you to achieve greatness. He thanked Maya specifically for her invaluable strategic insights and unwavering dedication to excellence. The omission was so glaring that Sarah saw several people at her table exchange glances. Rebecca Walsh raised her eyebrows and leaned closer to Sarah. "Interesting speech," she murmured, very telling in what he chose not to say. Sarah nodded, her smile never wavering, even as she filed away this final proof of how completely David had erased her from his public narrative of success. When David returned to his table, award in hand, Sarah stood and approached him with the gracious smile of a devoted wife celebrating her husband's achievement. "Congratulations, David," she said, her voice carrying clearly enough for nearby tables to hear. "What a wonderful recognition of all your hard work. I'm sure Maya must be thrilled to have contributed to such a significant achievement." The mention of Maya in this context, with its subtle implication of shared credit and intimate collaboration, caused a ripple of awareness among the sophisticated crowd. These were people who understood the nuances of business relationships and personal dynamics. David's eyes flashed with warning, but he couldn't respond with anything other than gracious acceptance without creating exactly the kind of scene he had spent years claiming Sarah was prone to making. "Thank you, sweetheart," he said through clenched teeth. "It's been quite an evening." "Oh, it's not over yet," Sarah replied with perfect innocence. "I've been having the most fascinating conversations with Marcus and Rebecca about market strategies and investment trends. I forgot how energizing it is to engage with such brilliant minds about complex business challenges." Each word was precisely chosen to remind everyone within earshot that Sarah was not just a decorative spouse, but someone with genuine professional expertise and intellectual capability. As the formal program concluded and guests began moving toward the after-party reception, Sarah found herself surrounded by people who wanted to continue conversations about business strategy, market analysis, and professional insights. For the first time in years, she was the center of attention for her intelligence, rather than an object of pity for her supposed instability. David watched from across the room as his carefully constructed narrative about his irrelevant, mentally fragile wife crumbled in real time. Every conversation Sarah engaged in, every laugh she earned, every moment of genuine connection she made was evidence that the woman he had spent years diminishing was not only competent, but remarkable. The evening was far from over, but Sarah had already achieved her primary objective. She had reminded everyone, including herself, exactly who she was when she wasn't being systematically destroyed by someone who claimed to love her. The after-party reception buzzed with the energy of successful deal-making and strategic networking, but Sarah felt as though she existed in a crystalline bubble of focused determination. She had spent the first part of the evening re-establishing her professional credibility. Now it was time for the second phase of her plan. David approached her at the bar where she was speaking with three venture capitalists about emerging market opportunities in Southeast Asian fintech. His expression was carefully controlled, but she could see the fury burning behind his professional mask. "Sarah, could I speak with you privately for a moment?" His voice was pleasant for the benefit of their audience, but his grip on her elbow was firm enough to bruise. "Of course," Sarah said with gracious warmth. "Gentlemen, if you'll excuse me, my husband seems eager to share this moment with me." She allowed David to guide her to a relatively quiet corner near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Dallas, but she positioned herself so that they remained visible to the party guests. Whatever David wanted to discuss, it would not happen in complete privacy. "What the hell are you trying to prove?" David's voice was low, but vibrant with contained rage. "This little performance, showing up here looking like some kind of corporate executive, pretending you have insights about industries you abandoned years ago. I'm not pretending anything. David, I'm simply being myself, the person I was before you convinced me I was worthless. You're embarrassing yourself, Sarah, and you're embarrassing me. These people know you as my wife, not as some business expert. They're being polite because they respect me, not because they're genuinely interested in your amateur opinions about complex market dynamics. The words were designed to wound, to send her scurrying back into the shadows where David preferred her to remain. But Sarah had spent weeks preparing for this moment, armoring herself with the truth about his systematic manipulation. Is that what you think, that Marcus Thompson and Rebecca Walsh and those three VCs were just being polite when they asked for my contact information to discuss potential consulting opportunities? David's face went pale. What consulting opportunities? Apparently, my work on the Cloud Sync campaign made quite an impression in the venture capital community. Rebecca's husband still uses it as a case study for effective market positioning. Marcus is interested in having me analyze the competitive landscape for several of his portfolio companies. That's impossible. You haven't worked in marketing for 6 years. Haven't I? Sarah's smile was serene, but her eyes were steel. David, there's quite a lot about my activities that you've chosen not to notice. Perhaps because you've been so focused on your own strategic partnerships? She let her gaze drift toward Maya, who was holding court at a table full of potential investors, looking young and eager and completely unaware that her presence at this event was about to become a liability rather than an asset. Maya's here as a business colleague, David said quickly. Her presence is purely professional. Of course it is. Just like it was purely professional when she accompanied you to Austin last month, and when you took her to dinner at Knife to celebrate the Stevenson Group preliminary agreement, and when you bought her that Cartier bracelet using the company credit card. David went very still. How do you know about any of that? Because I'm not the incompetent, mentally unstable woman you've been telling everyone I am. I'm an intelligent person who knows how to research information when she's being systematically lied to by someone she trusted. You hired a private investigator. It wasn't a question. I protected my interests, something I should have started doing years ago when you began moving our assets into accounts I couldn't access. The mention of hidden assets hit David like a physical blow. His carefully controlled expression cracked, revealing the panic beneath his professional facade. Sarah, you don't understand the complexities of business financial management. The asset restructuring was necessary for tax optimization and liability protection. Whose liability, David? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been systematically hiding marital assets while building a case to have me declared mentally incompetent. That's a very specific kind of financial fraud, isn't it? You're being paranoid again. This is exactly the kind of delusional thinking that concerns me about your mental state. But even as he spoke, David was scanning the reception, calculating who might be listening, how much damage this conversation might cause to his carefully maintained reputation. Delusional. Sarah's voice remained conversational, but it carried clearly enough for nearby guests to catch fragments of their exchange. Is it delusional to notice that you've spent the past year convincing our friends that I'm unstable? Is it delusional to document that you've been using company funds to finance your relationship with your assistant? Is it delusional to keep records of every time you've gaslit me into questioning my own memory and perception? Keep your voice down, David hissed, his mask slipping further. Why? Because you're concerned about what people might think if they knew the truth about our marriage, about how you've spent years systematically destroying my confidence, so you could justify replacing me with someone younger and more impressed by your success. Sarah was no longer the broken woman who had discovered that TikTok video 6 weeks earlier. She was the marketing executive who had built national campaigns, the strategic thinker who had outmaneuvered competitors with superior analysis and flawless execution. Sarah, you need to stop this right now. You're making a scene, proving exactly what I've been telling people about your inability to handle stress and social situations appropriately. Am I making a scene? Sarah looked around at the reception guests, many of whom were indeed watching their conversation with growing interest. Or am I finally telling the truth about a man who makes his living helping wealthy husbands hide assets from their wives while simultaneously destroying those women's credibility so they can't fight back effectively? The accusation hung in the air like a live grenade. David's face went white as he realized that Sarah somehow knew about the true nature of his business model, the illegal services his cryptocurrency platform provided to men who wanted to divorce-proof their wealth. "You have no idea what you're talking about," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Don't I, because I've spent considerable time researching your client base, David. Very interesting group of men, all facing or anticipating family court proceedings, and such similar patterns in how their assets mysteriously became difficult to trace or recover." Sarah pulled out her phone and showed David a screenshot of his LinkedIn post from 8 months earlier. "Successfully implemented preemptive asset protection strategy for personal portfolio. Wife completely unaware. Documenting her instability for future custody proceedings. This is how you win." "Where did you get that?" "You posted it yourself, in a private group for entrepreneurs discussing divorce strategies. Very educational reading, especially the part where you detailed how to psychologically manipulate a spouse into appearing mentally unstable." David grabbed for her phone, but Sarah smoothly stepped back, her movement graceful and controlled, even as her husband's facade crumbled into desperate aggression. "Give me that phone, Sarah." "I don't think so. Just like I don't think I'll be giving you the opportunity to continue systematically destroying me, while you profit from helping other men do the same to their wives." The conversation had attracted enough attention that Marcus Thompson approached them, his expression concerned but carefully neutral. "Is everything all right here?" Marcus asked, his investor's instinct clearly picking up on the tension and potential scandal. "Everything's perfect," Sarah said with radiant calm. "David and I were just discussing some fascinating business strategies, weren't we, darling?" David looked at his wife, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time in years. Gone was the defeated woman he had convinced everyone was mentally unstable. In her place stood someone formidable, someone who had been gathering ammunition while pretending to be broken, someone who was now prepared to use everything she had learned against him. "We should continue this at home," David said carefully. "Should we? I think we've said everything that needs to be said, at least in private." Sarah's smile was pleasant, but her meaning was unmistakable. She had fired the opening shot in a war David didn't even realize he had started years earlier, when he decided she was disposable. As Sarah walked away from her husband toward the group of venture capitalists who had been waiting to continue their conversation about market analysis, she felt the liberation that came with finally fighting back against someone who had spent years convincing her she was powerless. Behind her, David remained frozen by the windows, his award for innovation heavy in his hands, his reputation already beginning to crack under the weight of truths he thought he had successfully buried. The real battle was just beginning. Sarah woke up the next morning in their king-size bed to find David's side cold and empty. A note on his pillow written in his characteristic sharp handwriting: "Emergency business trip to Los Angeles. Investor crisis. Back Friday. David." She should have felt suspicious about the timing, coming less than 12 hours after their confrontation at the Techstar Gala, but instead the house felt lighter without his presence. The air seemed cleaner, easier to breathe, without the constant weight of his judgment and manipulation pressing down on her shoulders. For 3 days, Sarah experienced what felt like a preview of freedom. She took Connor and Emma to their activities without checking in every hour, without enduring interrogations about who she spoke to and what she discussed. She called Jessica without calculating whether David might be monitoring her phone records. She even started sketching marketing concepts for the consulting opportunities that had emerged from the gala, her creative instincts returning like muscle memory after years of forced dormancy. Wednesday evening brought the first sign that David's absence was more strategic than it appeared. Jessica called with information that made Sarah's blood run cold. "I've been doing research on your husband's business practices," Jessica said, her voice tight with professional concern. "Sarah, we need to talk. In person. Tonight." Jessica arrived within the hour, carrying a manila folder thick with documents and wearing the grim expression of someone delivering terminal diagnosis news. "Tell me," Sarah said, settling onto her living room couch with the kind of calm that came from already suspecting the worst. "David's been planning this for months, possibly longer. The systematic isolation, the gaslighting, the financial control. It's all been building towards something bigger." Jessica opened the folder and spread documents across the coffee table. "I found preliminary custody petition paperwork filed with the family court. He's claiming you're mentally unstable, financially irresponsible, and potentially dangerous to the children. Sarah stared at the legal documents, her name appearing again and again in clinical language that painted her as an unfit mother and unstable spouse. Dangerous. How am I dangerous? According to these filings, you've been exhibiting increasingly erratic behavior, paranoid accusations about his business relationships, compulsive spending, social isolation, mood swings that frighten the children. He has witness statements prepared to support all of these claims. What witnesses? Jessica's expression grew even more grim. Maya Chen, for one, she's prepared to testify that you confronted her aggressively at the Techstar Awards, making wild accusations and creating a public scene that left her feeling threatened. Several of your former friends will testify about concerning behavior they've observed during school pickup and social events. That's impossible. I haven't done anything wrong. That's not the point. Sarah, David's been building a narrative for months, maybe years. Every time he made you doubt your memory, every time he isolated you from friends, every financial transaction he controlled without your input, it was all preparation for this legal strategy. Sarah felt the room spinning as the full scope of David's manipulation became clear. The TikTok video, finding out about Maya, my reaction to all of it. He planned that, didn't he? I think so. The video was posted from Maya's account, but the timing, the location, even the caption seemed designed to provoke exactly the response you had. Jealous wife discovers husband's affair and becomes increasingly unstable, trying to prove it. And my makeover for the gala. The way I confronted him. Perfect evidence of erratic spending and public instability according to his legal strategy. Sarah, he's been 3 steps ahead of you this entire time. The documents spread across the coffee table told a story Sarah barely recognized as her own life. Financial records showing unexplained purchases and account transfers that painted her as either incompetent or deceptive. Psychological evaluation requests based on concerning behavior patterns that her own husband had documented with clinical precision. There's more, Jessica said quietly. He's requesting full custody and spousal support. From you. Spousal support from me. He's arguing that his business success supported your lifestyle for years, while you contributed nothing to household income. Now your alleged mental instability and reckless behavior threaten his ability to maintain the company and provide for the children? Sarah started laughing, a sound with no humor in it whatsoever. So he systematically destroys my career, isolates me from professional networks, convinces me I'm worthless, and then uses my financial dependence as evidence that I'm incompetent. It's textbook financial abuse designed to create legal vulnerability? And Sarah, there's something else. The custody hearing is scheduled for next Monday. Next Monday, but today is Wednesday. Emergency custody hearings can be expedited when there's alleged immediate danger to children. David's legal team filed evidence that you've been becoming increasingly unstable, and they're concerned for Connor and Emma's safety. Sarah felt her world tilting sideways. Everything she thought she understood about her situation was wrong. She hadn't been slowly recognizing David's manipulation and fighting back. She had been walking directly into every trap he had spent months preparing. What kind of evidence? Jessica pulled out another set of documents. Recordings. Sarah. Audio recordings of you crying, arguing with him, expressing anger and frustration about Maya and his treatment of you. Taken out of context, they sound like evidence of severe mental instability. He recorded me in our own home, probably on his phone during arguments. A few minutes of strategic recording during your most emotional moments, edited to remove his provocation, and suddenly you sound genuinely unhinged. The betrayal was so complete, so expertly orchestrated, that Sarah felt a strange kind of admiration for its thoroughness. David hadn't just been cheating on her. He had been documenting every moment of her pain as ammunition for this ultimate destruction. The house, our savings, my access to the children, he's been positioning to take everything, Sarah said quietly. Yes. And with his business income and your lack of current employment, plus the mental health allegations, he'll probably succeed unless we can prove systematic emotional abuse and financial fraud. Can we prove it? Jessica was quiet for a long moment. That's the problem. Sarah, everything you've told me about his manipulation tactics, The gaslighting, the financial control, it's all true, but it's also very difficult to prove in court, especially when he has documented evidence of what appears to be unstable behavior on your part. That night, Sarah lay awake in her empty bed staring at the ceiling and facing the full magnitude of her situation. David had her children's future, her financial security, and her reputation completely at his mercy. He had turned her friends into unwitting witnesses against her mental stability. He had documented her most vulnerable moments as evidence of her unfitness as a mother. Most devastating of all, she was beginning to understand that her moment of triumph at the Techstar Gala hadn't been her reclamation of power. It had been David's evidence of her public instability, her inability to maintain appropriate social behavior under stress. Even her decision to fight back had been anticipated and incorporated into his strategy against her. For the first time since discovering that TikTok video, Sarah allowed herself to cry. Deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from somewhere primal and raw. She cried for the woman she used to be, for the children she was about to lose, for the life that had been systematically stolen from her by someone who had once promised to love and protect her. But when the tears finally stopped, Sarah wiped her face and opened her laptop. If David wanted to play games at the professional level, she would learn his rules, but this time, she would write her own ending. She started researching everything: offshore banking regulations, financial fraud statutes, emotional abuse patterns, custody law precedents. If Jessica couldn't help her navigate the legal system David had rigged against her, Sarah would represent herself. She had been underestimating her opponent, but David had made one crucial mistake in his calculations. He had underestimated her. Sarah's research consumed the next 48 hours, transforming her dining room into a war room covered with legal documents, financial records, and printed articles about emotional abuse and psychological manipulation. She had always been methodical in her professional work, and now she applied that same systematic approach to dismantling her husband's carefully constructed case against her. The breakthrough came at 2:37 in the morning on Friday, when exhaustion had sharpened her focus to a laser point and she was cross-referencing David's business expenses with their personal financial records. Hidden in the maze of corporate transactions and cryptocurrency transfers, she found a pattern that made her hands shake with excitement and rage. David's company wasn't just providing financial services to wealthy clients. It was specifically designed to help high-net-worth individuals hide assets from family courts during divorce proceedings. The cryptocurrency platform created layers of complex transactions that made marital property virtually impossible to trace or recover. But more damaging than the business model itself were David's own social media posts in private LinkedIn groups for entrepreneurs and business owners. Posts where he bragged about divorce-proofing his personal wealth, about documenting unstable spouse behavior for future custody proceedings, about helping other men protect their assets from predatory ex-wives. Sarah screenshot everything, her hands trembling as she realized the full scope of David's deception. He hadn't just planned to leave her. He had built an entire business around helping men destroy their wives financially and legally while profiting from their expertise in systematic manipulation. One post, dated 10 months earlier, read, "Successfully implemented preemptive psychological conditioning strategy with target spouse." Subject now exhibiting documented patterns of paranoid behavior, financial incompetence, and social isolation. Custody case will be straightforward when I'm ready to execute exit strategy. Target spouse. Subject, exit strategy. Sarah wasn't just David's wife. She was his test case for a business model that helped wealthy men systematically destroy their families while maintaining public respectability. But the most devastating discovery was still to come. As Sarah dug deeper into David's professional connections, she found links to Maya Chen's real background that made her blood run cold. Maya wasn't just David's assistant, and she wasn't engaged to someone in Seattle. She was a former federal prosecutor who had specialized in financial crimes before leaving the U.S. Attorney's Office under circumstances that weren't entirely clear. A deeper search revealed why Maya had left prosecution work. She had been investigated for leaking information to defense attorneys in exchange for payment. Though she had never been formally charged, she had resigned rather than face an ethics hearing that would have ended her legal career permanently. David hadn't just hired an assistant who happened to be attractive and intelligent. He had recruited a corrupt former prosecutor who understood exactly how to manipulate the legal system from the inside. Sarah's mind raced as the implications became clear. Every legal strategy David had employed, every document filed, every witness statement prepared, showed the fingerprints of someone who had worked inside the system and learned how to game it effectively. Maya's testimony about Sarah's behavior at the Techstar Awards hadn't been simple character assassination. It had been crafted by someone who understood exactly what evidence would be most damaging in family court proceedings. The custody petition, the financial documentation, even the timing of the emergency hearing, all of it showed professional-level legal strategy designed by someone who had spent years prosecuting similar cases. Sarah was facing not just her manipulative husband, but a criminal conspiracy designed by someone who had made a career out of understanding how to destroy people through the legal system. The realization should have been devastating, but instead Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in months: hope, because Maya's background also represented David's biggest vulnerability. If Maya was helping David commit financial fraud while providing false testimony in family court, she was committing multiple felonies that could result in decades in federal prison. If Sarah could prove their collaboration extended beyond personal relationship to criminal conspiracy, she could bring down David's entire operation. At 6 a.m. on Saturday morning, Sarah called the FBI's financial crimes hotline. "I'd like to report a cryptocurrency-based money laundering operation that's being used to help wealthy individuals commit perjury in family court proceedings," she told Agent Rebecca Martinez, who answered her call. "Ma'am, those are very serious allegations. Do you have documentation to support your claims?" "I have everything: financial records, social media posts where my husband details his strategies, evidence of systematic asset hiding, and proof that a former federal prosecutor is helping coordinate false testimony in custody proceedings." "Can you be in our Dallas office Monday morning at 9 a.m.? "I'll be there." Saturday and Sunday passed in a blur of document organization and strategic planning. Sarah prepared presentations that would make her former marketing clients proud. Comprehensive analyses of David's business model, client base, and criminal activities that painted a picture of systematic fraud spanning multiple jurisdictions. Monday morning arrived gray and cold, matching Sarah's mood as she sat in the FBI field office conference room while Agent Martinez reviewed the material she had compiled. The agent's expression grew increasingly grave as she worked through the evidence. "Mrs. Mitchell, this is remarkably thorough documentation. How did you manage to compile all this information without your husband's knowledge?" "I had considerable motivation," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was revealing. "And I spent 8 years in strategic marketing, analyzing complex business models and competitive intelligence. These skills are transferable. The scope of what you're alleging is significant. If accurate, we're looking at wire fraud, money laundering, obstruction of justice, and potential RICO violations." "What about my custody hearing?" "It's scheduled for this afternoon." Agent Martinez leaned forward, her expression serious. "Mrs. Mitchell, if we move forward with this investigation, your husband will likely be arrested within days. The publicity could affect your children, and the legal proceedings could take years. Are you prepared for those consequences?" Sarah thought about Connor asking why Daddy was angry all the time, about Emma flinching when David raised his voice, about the kind of man she was allowing to shape her children's understanding of marriage and family relationships. "My children are living with someone who makes his living destroying families," Sarah said quietly. "Whatever happens next has to be better than that." "There's something else you should know," Agent Martinez said. "We've been monitoring communications between several individuals and networks similar to what you're describing. Your husband has been discussing contingency plans in case his legal troubles escalate." Sarah's blood ran cold. "What kind of contingency plans?" "Relocation. He's been researching countries without extradition treaties and transferring assets to jurisdictions where they would be difficult to recover. Based on intercepted communications, he's planning to execute this strategy within the next few weeks. He's planning to run with your children." The room seemed to tilt sideways as Sarah processed the implications. David wasn't just planning to destroy her legally and financially. He was preparing to disappear with Connor and Emma to somewhere she would never be able to find them. "How long do we have based on the communications we've been monitoring?" "He's planning to implement his exit strategy before the custody hearing decision becomes final. He's been telling associates that he needs to clean up loose ends before moving to the execution phase." Sarah understood immediately what those loose ends included. Her. What can we do? Agent Martinez opened a file that was already surprisingly thick. We can accelerate our timeline, but we'll need your cooperation. Are you willing to wear recording equipment and confront your husband about what you've discovered 2 hours later? Sarah sat in her car outside David's downtown office building, federal recording equipment taped to her chest and FBI agents monitoring every word through sophisticated surveillance technology. The plan was straightforward: get David to admit to the financial crimes on tape while discussing his plans to flee the country with the children. If he tried to threaten her or revealed specific details about his exit strategy, the agents would move in immediately. Sarah took the elevator to the 32nd floor, where Mitchell Technologies occupied a suite of offices that David had designed to project success and innovation. The reception area featured awards and media coverage, highlighting David as one of Dallas's most promising young entrepreneurs. She found David in his corner office, working on his laptop with Maya beside him, reviewing legal documents. They looked up in surprise as Sarah entered without announcement. "Sarah," David said, his voice carefully controlled but unable to hide his shock at her unexpected appearance. "What are you doing here? The custody hearing is in 3 hours. I know exactly what you've been doing." "David," Sarah said, her voice stronger than she felt, "the offshore accounts, the cryptocurrency money laundering, the systematic asset hiding, your business model that helps wealthy men defraud their wives while you profit from teaching them psychological manipulation techniques." David's expression didn't change, but Maya immediately stood and moved toward the door with the fluid motion of someone preparing to flee. "I think I should leave you two to discuss this privately," Maya said. "Sit down, Maya," Sarah commanded, with an authority that surprised all three of them. "This concerns you directly. Former federal prosecutor helping current criminals commit financial crimes while providing false testimony in family court proceedings. That's worth at least 20 years in federal prison. Don't you think?" Maya froze halfway to the door, her face going pale as she realized that Sarah somehow knew about her background and current activities. David slowly closed his laptop and stood up, his mask finally slipping completely to reveal the cold calculation beneath his practiced charm. "You've been busy," he said, his voice deadly quiet. "But you're still the same paranoid, mentally unstable woman who creates scenes at business events. No federal agent is going to believe the desperate accusations of someone who's about to lose custody of her children." "Actually, they already believe me," Sarah said. "I gave them everything. David, every post you made about hiding assets, every client you helped defraud their families, every illegal transaction you processed through your cryptocurrency platform, they're particularly interested in your exit strategy discussions." The silence that followed was electric with tension. David looked at Maya, some urgent silent communication passing between them, before turning back to Sarah with an expression that combined rage and something that looked almost like admiration. "You have no idea what you've done," he said softly. "Do you really think Connor and Emma are safe with all this federal attention on our family? Do you think I'll let you destroy everything I've built just to satisfy your vindictive need for revenge?" The threat was clear and unmistakable, and Sarah heard Agent Martinez's voice in her earpiece. "We're moving in now. Keep him talking." "Is that a threat against our children?" "David," Sarah asked clearly, making sure the recording equipment captured every word. "It's a reality check. You've always been too naive to understand the serious world that successful people operate in. Now you're going to learn what happens when amateurs try to play games with professionals?" Before David could say more, the office door exploded open as federal agents flooded the space with tactical precision, their voices shouting commands that echoed through the pristine corporate environment David had built to showcase his success. "David Mitchell, you're under arrest for wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to obstruct justice." As handcuffs clicked around David's wrists, Sarah felt a combination of vindication, terror, and exhaustion that left her trembling. She had won this battle, but the war for her children's future was just beginning. Agent Martinez appeared at her side as other agents processed the scene. "Are you all right, Mrs. Mitchell?" "I will be," Sarah said, watching as her husband of 9 years was led away in handcuffs, his carefully constructed facade of respectability crumbling in real time. "What happens now?" "Now we build a case that ensures David Mitchell and his accomplices never have the opportunity to destroy another family. For the first time in months, Sarah felt like she could breathe freely. The FBI conference room smelled of stale coffee and determination as Sarah sat across from Agent Martinez and Assistant U.S. Attorney James Harrison, surrounded by evidence boxes that contained the documentation of her husband's systematic destruction of their marriage and multiple other families. Mrs. Mitchell, Harrison began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had prosecuted complex financial crimes for over 15 years. The evidence you've provided has opened an investigation that extends far beyond your personal situation. We're looking at a criminal enterprise that has processed over $50 million in hidden assets for more than 200 clients across multiple states. Sarah absorbed this information with the strange detachment that had become her default emotional state. How many families? We're still counting. But preliminary estimates suggest David's operation has helped wealthy individuals steal approximately $120 million from their spouses and children over the past 4 years. The psychological manipulation strategies he documented and taught to clients have been used to destroy the credibility of hundreds of women in family court proceedings. The scope of the damage was staggering. Sarah had thought she was fighting for her own family. Instead, she had uncovered a systematic assault on the institution of marriage itself, a business model built on helping men escape their responsibilities to the people they had promised to love and protect. "What about Maya Chen?" Sarah asked. Agent Martinez consulted her notes. "Her involvement runs deeper than we initially realized. She's been recruiting former prosecutors, family court judges, and legal professionals to provide information about ongoing custody cases in exchange for payment. The corruption network extends across Texas, California, and New York, involving more than 20 legal professionals who have been taking money to influence family court outcomes. She was selling access to the justice system. Essentially, yes, Maya would identify cases where wealthy men were facing significant financial exposure in divorce proceedings, then connect them with David's asset-hiding services while simultaneously providing inside information about legal strategies and judicial preferences." Harrison leaned forward, his expression grim. "Mrs. Mitchell, your husband is facing 25 to 30 years in federal prison. The charges include wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy to obstruct justice, and RICO violations for operating a criminal enterprise. Maya Chen is facing similar charges, with additional counts for corruption and bribery of public officials. What about my custody case? The family court judge who was handling your proceedings has been suspended pending investigation into her financial relationship with Maya Chen. Your custody hearing has been postponed indefinitely while we sort through the extent of the corruption in your case." Sarah felt a complex mix of relief and apprehension. "So I get my children back. Given that your husband was preparing to flee the country with Connor and Emma, and considering the criminal charges involved, yes, you'll regain full custody immediately. The allegations about your mental stability have been revealed as part of a systematic fraud designed to facilitate kidnapping." The word kidnapping hit Sarah like a physical blow. David hadn't just been planning to divorce her and take the children. He had been preparing to steal them permanently, to erase them from her life as completely as he had tried to erase her sense of reality and self-worth. "When will he go to trial?" Harrison and Martinez exchanged glances. "That's complicated," Harrison said. "David's attorney has indicated his client might be willing to plead guilty in exchange for a reduced sentence and cooperation with our investigation of the broader network." "What kind of cooperation?" "Client lists, financial records, documentation of the psychological manipulation techniques he developed and taught to other perpetrators. His cooperation could help us prosecute hundreds of men who have used his services to defraud their families." Sarah considered this development with mixed feelings. Part of her wanted David to face the maximum possible consequences for what he had done to her and their children. But another part of her recognized that his cooperation could help law enforcement protect other families from the same systematic destruction she had endured. How long would his sentence be with a plea agreement? 18 to 22 years, assuming full cooperation and acceptance of responsibility for his actions. Sarah nodded slowly, processing the magnitude of what lay ahead. "And the other men who used his services." "That's where it gets interesting," Agent Martinez said. "We've identified over 200 clients who use David's platform to hide assets during divorce proceedings. Many of them are prominent businessmen, politicians, and professionals who thought their crimes were completely hidden behind cryptocurrency transactions and offshore accounts. We're talking about seizing hundreds of millions in fraudulently hidden assets and returning them to the families who were defrauded. Harrison added, "Your case isn't just about personal justice anymore, Mrs. Mitchell. It's become the foundation for one of the largest family fraud prosecutions in federal history." 3 weeks later, the story broke nationally. Sarah watched from her living room as CNN reported on the digital divorce fraud ring that had helped wealthy men steal from their own families while psychologically destroying their wives to prevent them from fighting back effectively. The media attention was overwhelming but necessary. Every news report brought forward more victims, more women who had been systematically gaslit and financially abused by men who had learned their techniques from David's detailed instruction manuals. Sarah found herself at the center of a movement she never intended to start. Reporters called constantly, asking her to appear on television to discuss her experience and help other women recognize the warning signs of systematic manipulation. "You don't have to do any of this," Jessica reminded her during one of their weekly strategy sessions. "You've already done more than anyone could expect by bringing down David's operation." "But what about all the other women who are living through what I survived?" Sarah replied. "What about the ones who are still being convinced they're crazy, still having their realities reshaped by men who learned from David's playbook?" The decision to go public wasn't easy, but it felt necessary. Sarah began speaking at conferences about financial abuse, helping attorneys recognize the sophisticated psychological manipulation tactics that made their clients appear unstable or unreliable in court. Her first television appearance was on Good Morning America, where she sat across from host Robin Roberts and calmly explained how systematic gaslighting worked and why traditional divorce attorneys were often unprepared to recognize or combat it. "The goal isn't just to steal money," Sarah explained to the national audience. "It's to make the victim complicit in their own destruction by convincing them they're too mentally unstable to trust their own perceptions. By the time they realize what's happening, their credibility has been so thoroughly destroyed that even their own attorneys doubt their version of events." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Sarah's phone rang constantly with calls from women who recognized their own experiences in her story, from attorneys who wanted to learn how to better protect their clients, from law enforcement agencies dealing with similar cases in their jurisdictions. Within 6 months, Sarah had helped law enforcement agencies in 12 states identify and investigate similar operations. The techniques David had developed and monetized were being used by abusive men across the country, creating an epidemic of financial and psychological destruction that had been largely invisible to the legal system. The federal courthouse in downtown Dallas buzzed with media attention as David Mitchell's trial began 18 months after his arrest. Sarah sat in the gallery, no longer the broken woman who had discovered that TikTok video, but someone who had transformed her personal nightmare into a mission to protect other families. David looked diminished in his orange jumpsuit, his carefully maintained facade of success replaced by the hollow appearance of someone whose entire identity had been built on lies and manipulation. When he entered his guilty plea, his voice was barely audible as he admitted to charges that would keep him in federal prison for the next 20 years. "Your Honor," David said when given the opportunity to address the court, "I want to apologize to my wife and children for the pain I've caused them, and to the hundreds of families whose lives I helped destroy through my criminal enterprise." The words felt empty to Sarah, scripted by attorneys rather than emerging from genuine remorse. But they were legally significant, part of the cooperation agreement that would help prosecutors dismantle the entire network of corruption that had enabled his crimes. Maya Chen's trial was more dramatic, as she refused to accept a plea agreement and insisted on fighting the charges despite overwhelming evidence of her guilt. Her defense attorney attempted to portray her as a victim of David's manipulation, but the jury saw through the strategy when prosecutors presented evidence of her active role in corrupting multiple judges and legal proceedings. Maya Chen didn't just facilitate financial fraud, Prosecutor Harrison told the jury during closing arguments. She systematically corrupted the legal system that families depend on for justice. She sold access to judges, influenced custody decisions for money, and helped destroy the lives of children who deserved better from the adults who were supposed to protect them. The verdict came quickly guilty on all counts. Maya would spend the next 25 years in federal prison, her legal career permanently destroyed along with her freedom. But the most significant development came during the broader investigation that followed David's cooperation with federal authorities. The client list he provided led to prosecutions in 15 states, revealing a network of wealthy men who had systematically defrauded their families while using sophisticated psychological manipulation to avoid consequences. Sarah testified in dozens of cases, helping juries understand how gaslighting and financial abuse work together to trap victims in cycles of confusion and self-doubt. Her testimony was crucial in securing convictions against men who had seemed like pillar of the community types, but had actually been predators operating within their own families. The most high-profile case involved a prominent Texas politician who had used David's services to hide $8 million while convincing his wife that her concerns about missing money were evidence of early-onset dementia. The man had been preparing to have her committed to a psychiatric facility when the FBI investigation exposed his crimes. "This isn't just about money," Sarah explained to the jury in that case. "It's about power and control taken to their ultimate extreme. These men didn't just want to escape their marriages, they wanted to completely destroy their wives' ability to exist independently in the world." The politician received 30 years in federal prison, and his wife recovered not only her financial assets, but her sense of reality and self-worth that had been systematically destroyed over 15 years of marriage. As the prosecutions continued, Sarah found herself becoming an unofficial expert on financial abuse and psychological manipulation in domestic relationships. Law schools invited her to speak about recognizing sophisticated abuse tactics. Professional organizations for attorneys and judges implemented new training programs based on the patterns she had identified in David's operation. The National Organization for Women honored her with their annual Courage Award, recognizing her role in exposing a form of abuse that had been largely invisible to the legal system and social services. Sarah Mitchell represents the power of one person's refusal to accept lies as truth. Now President Terry O'Neill said during the award ceremony, "She turned her personal nightmare into a national awakening about the sophisticated tactics that abusive men use to destroy their families while maintaining public respectability." But for Sarah, the most meaningful recognition came from the women who approached her after her speaking engagements. Women who said her story had helped them recognize their own situations and find the courage to fight back against systematic manipulation. "You showed me that I wasn't crazy," one woman said after a conference in Phoenix. "My husband had me convinced that I was having memory problems, that I was paranoid and unstable. Hearing your story helped me understand that my reality was being deliberately distorted." These conversations reminded Sarah why she had chosen to transform her private pain into public advocacy. Every woman who recognized her own experience in Sarah's story represented a family that might be saved from the kind of systematic destruction she had endured. 2 years after the Techstar Awards Gala, where her nightmare had reached its crescendo, Sarah stood in the conference room of her own consulting firm, Mitchell Strategic Consulting, reviewing marketing plans for a client's national product launch. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was now using her maiden name professionally, reclaiming the identity that David had tried to erase. Her company specialized in crisis communications and reputation management, helping businesses and individuals recover from public scandals and rebuild their credibility. The skills she had learned while navigating her own destruction had proven surprisingly valuable in helping others emerge from their worst moments stronger than before. Connor and Emma thrived in their new reality, attending private school paid for by the recovered assets from David's criminal enterprise, and participating in activities that helped them process their father's betrayal through therapy and healthy outlets. Connor played soccer with the intensity that suggested he was working through complex emotions about masculinity and power, while Emma had developed a fierce independence that reminded Sarah of herself at that age. "Mom, are you going to be on TV again?" Emma asked one evening as they prepared dinner together in their new kitchen. Sarah had sold the house she had shared with David, using the proceeds to buy a smaller but more comfortable home that didn't carry the weight of traumatic memories. "Just a quick interview for CNN about the new legislation," Sarah replied, referring to the federal law that had been named after her case, the Mitchell Act, which required family courts to receive training about financial abuse and psychological manipulation in custody proceedings. "Do you think Daddy watches you on TV?" Connor asked with the direct curiosity of a 10-year-old who was still processing his father's transformation from respected businessman to federal prisoner. Sarah considered her answer carefully. She had worked hard to help her children understand what had happened without demonizing their father or making them feel responsible for his choices. I think your father is probably focused on his own situation right now, she said diplomatically. The most important thing is that you know none of what happened was your fault and that you're safe and loved now. David sent letters occasionally from federal prison, carefully worded communications that his attorneys had probably reviewed before mailing. He expressed remorse for his actions and asked about the children. But Sarah detected the same manipulative undertones that had characterized their entire marriage. Even in prison, David was trying to control the narrative and position himself as the victim of circumstances rather than the architect of systematic family destruction. Sarah rarely responded to these letters, and when she did, her replies were brief and factual. The man she had loved and married was gone, replaced by someone who had revealed himself capable of breathtaking cruelty disguised as devotion. The financial settlement from the criminal case had been substantial, involving not just the recovery of assets David had hidden, but also restitution from his business partners and co-conspirators. Sarah was financially secure for the first time in her adult life, but more importantly, she was emotionally and psychologically free from the kind of manipulation that had nearly destroyed her sense of reality. Her relationship with Jessica had been complicated by revelations about David's early recruitment of her as an unwitting source of information, but they had worked through the betrayal with the help of professional counseling. Jessica now served as Sarah's attorney for the various civil cases still winding their way through the courts. "I've been thinking about something," Jessica said during one of their monthly dinners at their favorite restaurant in Deep Ellum. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't found that TikTok video?" Sarah considered the question while cutting her salmon. "I think he would have found another trigger eventually. The video wasn't the cause of what happened. It was just the mechanism he used to start the final phase of his plan. If it hadn't been Maya and the conference, it would have been something else designed to make me react in ways he could document as evidence of instability." "You really think he planned it all from the beginning? Not the specific details, but the general strategy?" "Yes, David is someone who views other people as obstacles to be overcome or resources to be exploited. Once I served my purpose by giving him children and social respectability, I became a liability that needed to be managed and eventually eliminated." The conversation was interrupted by a young woman approaching their table with obvious nervousness. "Excuse me, are you Sarah Mitchell? I'm sorry to interrupt your dinner, but I wanted to thank you. I saw your interview on 60 Minutes last month, and it helped me realize that I wasn't going crazy. My husband has been doing exactly what you described, making me doubt my memory and perception while he hides money and builds a case that I'm mentally unstable." Sarah invited the woman to join them for coffee and spent an hour providing resources and referrals that could help her document the abuse and protect her children. These encounters happened regularly now, and Sarah never turned away someone who needed help navigating the kind of sophisticated manipulation she had survived. "How many women do you think you've helped?" Jessica asked as they walked to their cars after dinner. "Directly, maybe 300 or 400. But the real impact is in changing how the legal system recognizes and responds to financial abuse. The training programs we've developed have reached thousands of attorneys, judges, and law enforcement officers who are now better equipped to protect families from these kinds of predators." As Sarah drove home through Dallas traffic, she reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this point. The woman who had discovered that devastating TikTok video seemed like a different person now. Someone from another lifetime who had been living in a prison of her own husband's creation without even realizing it. The red dress from the Tech Star Awards still hung in her closet, a reminder of the night she had started fighting back without fully understanding what she was up against. But Sarah rarely looked at it anymore. She didn't need costumes or performances to feel powerful. She was powerful, with or without anyone's permission or approval. At home, Connor and Emma were finishing homework at the kitchen island while their babysitter cleaned up from dinner. This was Sarah's favorite time of day, the peaceful domestic moments that had been impossible during the years when David's presence had filled their home with tension and unspoken threats. "How was school today?" she asked as she always did, settling beside them to review math problems and English essays. "Good," Emma said, looking up from her art project. "Mrs. Rodriguez said my drawing about strong women was really creative. I drew you on TV helping other moms." Sarah felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came with being seen clearly by her children. Being recognized not as the broken woman David had tried to create, but as the person she had chosen to become, despite everything he had done to destroy her. "What did you learn about strong women?" Sarah asked. "That they're not strong because nothing bad happens to them," Connor said with a thoughtfulness that sometimes surprised her in a 10-year-old. "They're strong because when bad things happen, they figure out how to make things better instead of just being sad." That night, after the children were asleep, Sarah sat in her home office responding to emails from attorneys, journalists, and advocacy organizations. The work was demanding but fulfilling in ways she had never experienced during her marketing career. She was using her skills and intelligence not just to sell products, but to protect families and seek justice for people who had been systematically victimized. Her phone rang with a call from a producer at CNN, asking if she could appear on a panel discussion about proposed federal legislation that would create specialized family courts trained to recognize financial abuse and psychological manipulation. "Of course," Sarah said. "When do you need me?" As she scheduled the appearance, Sarah caught her reflection in the dark window of her office. The woman looking back was confident, purposeful, and completely free from the fear that had defined so many years of her life. She had survived systematic psychological warfare designed by someone who had promised to love and protect her. She had not only reclaimed her own life, but had helped hundreds of other women do the same. Most importantly, she had shown her children that fighting back was possible, that truth ultimately mattered, and that no one had the right to make them feel small or worthless. Have you ever felt like your reality was being reshaped by someone who claimed to have your best interests at heart? Sometimes the people closest to us become the greatest threats to our sense of self and safety. Sarah's story reminds us that recognizing manipulation is the first step toward freedom, but that the journey from victim to survivor to advocate requires extraordinary courage and persistence. The most important lesson from Sarah's transformation is this: you are never as powerless as someone wants you to believe. Even in your darkest moment, when trusted institutions have failed you and the system seems rigged against you, you still have the power to document the truth, seek help from professionals who understand these situations, and ultimately choose how your story ends. If this story resonates with your experience, remember that specialized help is available. Financial abuse is a crime. Psychological manipulation is a recognized form of domestic violence, and there are attorneys, counselors, and advocates who understand these sophisticated tactics and can help you develop strategies to protect yourself and your children. Sarah Mitchell's courage in exposing one man's criminal enterprise helped protect hundreds of families from similar destruction. But her most profound victory was simpler and more personal. She refused to accept lies as truth, refused to believe she was worthless, and refused to let someone else define the boundaries of her possible future. In the end, that refusal to surrender her authentic self was the foundation for everything that followed. And it's available to anyone who finds the courage to claim it. If Sarah's story moved you, if it made you think differently about the hidden crimes that can happen inside seemingly perfect marriages, then I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever experienced someone trying to reshape your reality? Have you witnessed signs of systematic manipulation in your own life or someone you care about? Your stories matter, and sharing them helps other people recognize these dangerous patterns before it's too late. And if this story opened your eyes to something important, please hit that like button right now. It helps us reach more people who might need to hear Sarah's message of survival and strength. Don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell, because we share stories like this every week. Real accounts of people who refuse to accept the lies others tried to force them to believe. Stories of ordinary people who found extraordinary courage when they needed it most. Share this video with someone who might need to hear it. You never know whose life you might help save by simply spreading awareness about financial abuse and psychological manipulation. Remember, you are never as powerless as someone wants you to believe. Your reality matters, your truth matters, and your voice matters. Thanks for staying with us for Sarah's incredible journey from victim to survivor to advocate. We'll see you in the next story.